It all started with a piercing scream. On the crowded streets of Manhattan, a young homeless black girl, her clothes tattered and her face marked with desperation, shouted two chilling words that froze everyone in their tracks. "Don't eat that." Her voice sliced through the casual hum of cafe chatter, reaching the ears of one of the wealthiest men in the city, a billionaire whose hand hovered mid-air, inches from his mouth, as he stared at her in confusion. The people around him didn't take her seriously. They laughed, shook their heads, and dismissed her as just another street girl. Some whispered, some looked away, but no one truly listened. Yet there was something in her voice, a mix of urgency and fear, that made the billionaire hesitate. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Her frantic eyes darted between him and the plate in front of him, her voice trembling as she repeated the warning. "Please don't eat that." But why? What could she possibly know about the plate of food in front of him? The billionaire waved over his security team, the air growing heavier with tension as more eyes turned toward the scene. The girl tried to explain, but her words were drowned out by disbelief and suspicion. Within minutes, the police arrived, pulling her aside as she cried out, "You have to believe me." What happened next would leave everyone speechless. When the truth behind her desperate plea came to light, it sent shockwaves through the city and turned this chance encounter into a case that no one could ignore. Why did this homeless girl risk everything to stop a stranger from taking a bite of his meal? How could she have known what was hidden in the food? And, most importantly, who was behind it all? These are the questions that would unravel a story of power, privilege, and danger, a story that proves some warnings cannot be ignored. Before we dive deeper, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you love unraveling shocking true crime stories, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who loves a good mystery. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because the truth behind this story is unlike anything you've ever heard. The billionaire was no ordinary man. He was a symbol of power and success in New York City, a tech mogul who built an empire from nothing. His name commanded respect in boardrooms, his face was splashed across magazine covers, and his influence reached far beyond the glittering towers of Manhattan. He was celebrated for his philanthropy, hailed as a visionary, and envied by many. But for all his wealth and status, he was still just a man, vulnerable in ways he never imagined. On the other hand, she was invisible to most, a young black woman who had fallen through every crack in the system. She was no stranger to struggle, navigating life on the streets with sharp instincts and a will to survive. Her days were spent in the shadows, observing the world that had forgotten her, and yet she noticed everything. She had no riches, no influence, and no home to return to at night. But on that day, she held the key to something that could save a life or end it. They came from two completely different worlds. He sat in the comfort of an upscale cafe, surrounded by luxury and security, while she lingered just outside, blending into the background of Manhattan's bustling streets. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, one living in excess, the other fighting for scraps. And yet, in a moment of sheer instinct, she crossed the invisible line separating their lives. When she shouted her warning, it wasn't out of anger or spite, it was something deeper, something urgent. But how did she know? How could a girl with no connection to the billionaire's world hold a piece of knowledge so crucial, even his highly trained security missed it? Was it pure chance? Or was there something she had seen, something she had experienced, that made her recognize a danger no one else could see? Could it be that she had witnessed something dark, something others had ignored, that would later become the cornerstone of this shocking mystery? The streets of Manhattan have seen countless stories of power, greed, and survival. But this one is different. It forces us to question the lines we draw between privilege and struggle, between the seen and the unseen. How does a young woman, forgotten by society, become the unlikely hero in a story that would change everything? And what would you have done in her place? Stay with us as we dive deeper into the lives of these two individuals, the billionaire with everything to lose and the homeless girl with nothing left to give but the truth. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping black true crime stories. This story is just getting started, and trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. The billionaire's rise to power wasn't just a story of success, it was the kind of tale that built legends. Born to a modest family in Chicago, he was the first in his family to attend college. By his mid-20s, he had created a revolutionary tech company that transformed the way people communicated. Overnight, his name was etched into the annals of Silicon Valley, his face splashed across financial news channels as a self-made man. But with wealth and influence came enemies. His company disrupted industries, putting competitors out of business and ruffling powerful feathers. For every award he received, every gala he hosted, there were whispers in the background, rumors of betrayal, sabotage, and power struggles that never reached the headlines. By the time he moved to New York City, he was more than a businessman, he was a symbol of modern capitalism. His penthouse overlooked Central Park. His name was on the board of countless charities, and his philanthropy earned him glowing praise. But behind the glitz and glamour, there were cracks in his armor. Over the past year, subtle threats had begun to creep into his life. Anonymous emails, unsettling phone calls, and suspicious encounters followed him everywhere. His security team assured him it was nothing to worry about, chalking it up to the paranoia that came with power. But then, something happened that couldn't be ignored. A breach at his headquarters, where sensitive information was leaked to the public, damaging his reputation. The billionaire's perfect image started to unravel. He faced accusations of unethical business practices and lawsuits that questioned his integrity. His boardroom victories turned into battles for survival. And while his publicists fought to control the narrative, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. On the streets of New York, however, another story was unfolding, a story that couldn't have been more different. She didn't have his wealth or his power, but she had something he couldn't buy, the ability to survive when the world had given up on her. The homeless girl's life was a series of tragedies, each more devastating than the last. She had grown up in a system that failed her at every turn, a broken foster care network, an underfunded education system, and a community ravaged by neglect. By the time she turned 18, she was on her own, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Her days were spent searching for food, shelter, and safety. But living on the streets taught her one thing: how to see what others missed. She noticed patterns, small details that most people overlooked. It wasn't just survival. It was intuition sharpened by necessity. One night, she stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to see: a group of men exchanging packages in a dark alley. They didn't notice her, but she noticed them. She recognized one of the men from a news report about corporate espionage and thought little of it at the time. But weeks later, when she spotted the same man lurking near the cafe where the billionaire often dined, her instincts told her something was wrong. How could two lives so different collide in such a dramatic way? What unseen forces connected a billionaire fighting to protect his empire and a homeless girl trying to stay alive? And how did she know the danger lurking in his seemingly harmless meal? Stay with us as we connect the dots in this shocking story. Let us know what you think so far in the comments. Where are you watching from? The day seemed ordinary at first, just another busy afternoon in Manhattan. The billionaire, flanked by his usual entourage of bodyguards, entered a high-end cafe nestled in the heart of the city. It was a place he frequented often, known for its exclusivity and discretion. He greeted the staff with a nod, settled into his usual corner table, and placed his order, a meticulously prepared dish that was his favorite. Everything about the scene spoke of routine and control. But outside, on the crowded streets, someone was watching. The homeless girl had been lingering nearby, blending into the chaos of the city. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the cafe's bustling kitchen through a side window. At first, it looked like any other day. But then, she saw something or someone that set off an alarm in her mind. Inside the cafe, the billionaire's meal arrived with the same precision as always, plated to perfection and placed before him. He picked up his fork, ready to indulge, when it happened. A voice, desperate and piercing, cut through the air. "Don't eat that." The billionaire froze mid-motion, his hand hovering above the plate. Heads turned in unison toward the source of the outburst. There she was, a young black woman, disheveled and frantic, standing just outside the cafe's glass doors. Her voice carried urgency, but to many she looked like another homeless person causing a scene. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Some laughed nervously, dismissing her as a nuisance. Others whispered amongst themselves, wondering if she was crazy. But the girl didn't stop. She slammed her palms against the glass and shouted again, louder this time, "Please, don't eat it." The billionaire hesitated, glancing between his plate and the girl. His security team moved swiftly, stepping between him and the perceived threat. One of them approached the girl, telling her to back off. But she refused to leave. Her voice trembled as she pleaded, "You don't understand. I know what's in that food." The tension in the room was palpable. The billionaire, a man used to making split-second decisions, found himself at a crossroads. Should he ignore her and trust his carefully curated environment, or listen to the warning of someone society had dismissed? Reluctantly, he signaled to his security team. "Take the food," he instructed, his voice calm but laced with uncertainty. The dish was carefully removed and placed in a secure container for testing. All the while, the girl continued to plead, her words almost inaudible now over the murmurs of the crowd. The police arrived within minutes, summoned by the cafe staff. They questioned the girl, who repeated her warning. "You have to believe me. I've seen this before." The officers weren't convinced. To them, she was just another unstable individual trying to cause a commotion. They prepared to escort her away, but the billionaire intervened. "Hold on," he said. "Let her speak." Reluctantly, the officers paused. The girl's voice was shaky but determined as she explained what she'd seen: a suspicious figure lurking near the cafe, someone she recognized from a dangerous encounter weeks earlier. Her words painted a picture of a plot that sounded too wild to be true. But the billionaire couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. He ordered his team to send the food for immediate testing, leaving the cafe in a state of uneasy silence. The girl, now seated in a corner under police watch, kept her eyes fixed on the billionaire. Hours later, the results came back, and what they revealed would shatter any doubts. The meal was laced with a substance so deadly, so calculated, it left no question this was an assassination attempt. But who was behind it? And how did the homeless girl know what no one else could see? Stay with us as we unravel the shocking truth behind the cafe encounter. The deeper we go, the darker this story becomes. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. As the billionaire's meal was whisked away for testing, the investigation kicked into high gear. The cafe, once a picture of luxury and calm, was transformed into a scene of tension and scrutiny. Police officers cordoned off the area, questioning staff, combing through surveillance footage, and inspecting every corner of the kitchen. The once bustling dining room fell silent as the cafe's patrons watched in disbelief. The head chef, visibly shaken, insisted on the purity of his kitchen. "Nothing leaves this line without my approval," he stammered, his voice betraying his nerves. But the officers weren't taking chances. They began probing deeper, asking for records of food deliveries, staff schedules, and anything that could point to tampering. Outside, the homeless girl remained under police watch. She hadn't said much since the meal was taken away, but her eyes darted anxiously toward the cafe's entrance, as if she were waiting for something or someone. Meanwhile, the billionaire's team reviewed recent threats made against him. For months, he had received vague but unsettling warnings, anonymous emails, cryptic messages on social media, and even a suspicious package sent to his office. Most had been dismissed as the price of fame and wealth, but now those warnings carried a darker weight. The police began connecting the dots. A supplier to the cafe had been flagged in the past for questionable practices, and some employees had ties to less than reputable organizations. But nothing concrete emerged, just a web of possibilities. That's when the girl spoke up again. "You're looking in the wrong place," she said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. At first, the officers ignored her. But when she mentioned a name tied to a criminal network involved in corporate espionage and black market dealings, they couldn't dismiss her entirely. The billionaire's security team began to grow uneasy. They knew this wasn't just about a contaminated plate of food. This was something far more calculated. Could it have been an inside job? A competitor looking to eliminate their greatest rival? Or perhaps someone from the billionaire's own circle, someone who stood to gain from his downfall? The deeper the investigation went, the murkier the picture became. A rival tech mogul had recently been embroiled in a legal battle with the billionaire, accusing him of intellectual property theft. Could this be an act of revenge? Or was it tied to an underground criminal organization that had been targeting high-profile figures in the city for months? As law enforcement unraveled the threads, one thing became clear: the girl knew something no one else did. Her observations, dismissed by most, were proving crucial. But how had she come across such information? And why would she risk everything to warn a man who wouldn't have even glanced her way under normal circumstances? The police had more questions than answers, and the pressure was mounting. The billionaire, usually calm and composed, felt the walls closing in. This was no longer about protecting his reputation, this was about survival. Stay with us as the investigation deepens and the true scope of this conspiracy begins to take shape. The twists in this case will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. The room fell silent as the homeless girl, now seated across from the police and the billionaire, finally began to speak. Her voice, though quiet, carried a weight that silenced even the whispers of skepticism around her. "I've seen it before," she said, her gaze steady. "The packaging, the way the food was plated, it's not random. It's deliberate." The officers exchanged glances, doubtful but intrigued. The billionaire leaned forward, his sharp eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, seen it before?" he asked, his tone laced with a mix of irritation and curiosity. The girl took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. She described an encounter from weeks earlier, a moment that had seemed insignificant at the time but now made terrifying sense. One night, while searching for shelter, she had stumbled across a group of men unloading crates in a dimly lit alley behind a restaurant. She hadn't thought much of it until she overheard snippets of their conversation, words like distraction, target, and precise timing. At first, she thought they were just smugglers. But what caught her attention was the meticulous way they handled the food. She saw them remove the original packaging and replace it with containers bearing a specific label, a label she now recognized from the billionaire's plate. It wasn't just food, she explained, her voice growing firmer. They were preparing it like it was meant to do something. Her words hung in the air, met with a heavy silence. The officers looked skeptical. One of them leaned back, folding his arms. "And why didn't you report this when you saw it?" he asked, his tone almost dismissive. She let out a bitter laugh. "Report it? To who? You think anyone listens to someone like me? I'm just another nobody on the streets to you." The billionaire, still unsure whether to believe her, spoke up. "And what made you think it was connected to me?" Her eyes flashed with intensity. "The man in the alley, I saw him again. Today. He was watching you, watching the cafe. When I saw that plate, I knew. It's the same packaging, the same setup." The room buzzed with quiet tension. The girl's story was detailed, but it sounded improbable. Why would a homeless girl with no resources or connections know more than the police or the billionaire's team of highly trained security experts? The billionaire's lead security officer voiced what everyone was thinking. "How do we know you're not just making this up for attention, or to get something out of it?" The girl's expression hardened. "Do you think I want to be here? Do you think I wanted to put myself in front of everyone, knowing I'd be dismissed, humiliated, or worse? I don't want anything from you. I just didn't want to see someone die when I could stop it." As doubt lingered in the air, the clock continued to tick. The food had already been sent for testing, but results wouldn't arrive for hours. Every moment felt heavier than the last, the possibility of danger growing with each passing second. The billionaire, though still wary, couldn't ignore the fire in her eyes. There was something about her that felt genuine, something that told him this wasn't just a ploy. But he wasn't a man who acted on instinct alone. Time would reveal the truth, but time was running out. Would her warning prove to be the key to unraveling a deadly plot, or was it just the ramblings of someone desperate to be heard? Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth that lies at the heart of this case. The deeper we dig, the more questions arise, and the answers will leave you speechless. Hours later, the call everyone had been waiting for came in. The lab results were back. A police officer answered, their expression shifting from curiosity to dread as they scribbled notes. The billionaire, the girl, and the rest of the room froze, every eye fixed on the officer as they hung up the phone. The verdict was in. The food had been laced with a slow-acting poison, one that was nearly undetectable. It wasn't just dangerous, it was deliberate. The type of substance used was rare, difficult to trace, and engineered to go unnoticed until it was too late. This wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt. The billionaire's face darkened as the implications settled over him. Who had done this? And why? His security team scrambled into action, analyzing every angle, every detail. The police ramped up their investigation, turning their attention to the cafe's supply chain. As the pieces came together, A darker picture began to emerge. The poison wasn't just randomly acquired, it was tied to a known criminal organization, one that operated in the shadows of New York's elite. This group specialized in black market dealings, targeting high-profile figures in corporate espionage and carefully orchestrated attacks. Their methods were sophisticated, their motives murky, but their reach was undeniable. The Billionaire's recent controversies began to make sense in a horrifying new context. The lawsuits, the leaked information, the anonymous threats, they were all connected. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had been planning this for months, maybe longer. And somehow, in the middle of it all, the homeless girl had found herself in the crossfire. The police turned back to the girl, who had been quietly watching the chaos unfold. "How did you know?" one of the detectives asked, their skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I told you I saw them. I overheard things I wasn't supposed to. But you don't understand. This isn't just about him." She gestured toward the billionaire. "They're bigger than that. They don't just go after one person. They go after anyone who gets in their way." Her words sent a chill through the room. The girl explained that she'd stumbled upon the criminal group weeks ago, purely by chance. She'd been hiding in an alley to avoid the rain when she overheard them discussing their next move. At the time, she didn't understand the full scope of their plans. But she remembered the faces, the voices, and the details. Details that were now becoming terrifyingly clear. The poison wasn't just a weapon, it was a signature. This group had used it before, targeting other influential figures who had mysteriously fallen ill or died under suspicious circumstances. The girl had recognized the pattern in the cafe, the same way she had recognized one of the men lurking near the restaurant earlier that day. The billionaire's expression hardened. This wasn't just an attack on him, it was part of a larger conspiracy, one that could reach far beyond his empire. For the first time, he realized how much danger he was truly in. But as the girl's story unfolded, another question emerged. Why would she risk herself to save him? What had driven her to speak up when no one else would? Her answer was simple yet profound. "Because I knew no one else would. People like me, we see things others don't. But we're invisible to everyone else." Her role as an accidental witness had become a lifeline, a critical piece in unraveling a deadly plot. But the question remained, who was behind it all? And how far were they willing to go to silence anyone who stood in their way? Stay with us as we uncover the mastermind behind this chilling plot and dive deeper into the web of deception that brought a billionaire and a homeless girl together. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The truth is closer than ever, but the danger isn't over yet. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was darker than anyone could have anticipated. As investigators dug deeper into the billionaire's recent dealings, an unsettling pattern emerged. His empire, built on innovation and influence, had unknowingly become entangled in a web of corruption. The source of the poison and the criminal organization behind it weren't random. They were deeply connected to the billionaire's own network, suppliers, contractors, and intermediaries he trusted. His success, his wealth, and even his reputation had made him a target. But the deeper betrayal came from within. Key figures in his supply chain had been quietly siphoning resources, engaging in backdoor deals, and collaborating with shadowy figures for personal gain. And then there was the trigger, the deal that set everything in motion. Months earlier, the billionaire had entered negotiations for an exclusive contract with a global logistics company. What seemed like a routine business venture turned out to be a power play that disrupted the operations of a dangerous criminal syndicate. His move cut off a lucrative pipeline they relied on, and their retaliation was precise and brutal. The poison-laced meal was no accident. It was a calculated message. The billionaire wasn't just a target, he was a symbol. Taking him down would send shockwaves across industries and solidify the syndicate's control over its operations. But what they hadn't planned on was her, the homeless girl who had no stake in his empire, but who saw the danger no one else did. Her actions had saved his life, but the information she carried had the potential to do far more. The girl's knowledge of the syndicate, its operations, its members, and its methods was a crack in their carefully constructed facade. She had seen too much, heard too much, and now, with the police and the billionaire listening to her story, the syndicate's darkest secrets were at risk of exposure. The billionaire, still reeling from the realization that his empire had been infiltrated, made a decision. For years, he had prided himself on his ability to outmaneuver opponents in the boardroom. But this was different. This wasn't a corporate battle, this was life and death. With the girl's help, he vowed to dismantle the network that had targeted him. But it wouldn't be easy. The syndicate was vast, its reach extending far beyond what anyone had imagined. Taking them on would require exposing the corruption within his own organization, risking his reputation and even his fortune. For the girl, this was more than just survival, it was a chance to finally be heard, to prove that even someone society had discarded could make a difference. Her actions had already saved one life, but her courage had the potential to save many more. But the question lingered, how far would the syndicate go to protect its secrets? And could the billionaire and the girl uncover the truth before becoming their next targets? Stay with us as we dive deeper into this escalating battle for justice. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in their shoes? The stakes are higher than ever, and the final revelations will leave you speechless. The billionaire wasted no time. Armed with the girl's information and his own resources, he joined forces with law enforcement in an all-out effort to dismantle the criminal network. The operation was massive, involving raids, arrests, and the unearthing of long-hidden schemes. The public watched in shock as headlines broke day after day, exposing a syndicate that had operated in the shadows for years, weaving its influence into industries, corporations, and even political structures. But amidst the chaos, one story stood out: the homeless girl whose courage had stopped the plot before it could unfold. The billionaire, once a man of quiet power, decided to break his own silence. At a press conference surrounded by flashing cameras and microphones, he publicly acknowledged her pivotal role. "I owe my life to someone society has overlooked for far too long," he said, his voice steady yet emotional. "Her bravery not only saved me but exposed something far bigger, a system that allows those in power to exploit the vulnerable without consequence. It's time we listen to the voices we ignore." The girl, now thrust into the spotlight, became an overnight sensation. News outlets clamored to tell her story, but for her, the attention was both surreal and overwhelming. Offers of help poured in from every corner of the country: job opportunities, housing, education. For the first time in years, she saw a path forward. As her life began to change, so too did the public conversation. The story ignited debates about inequality, homelessness, and the potential hidden within those society often dismisses. People began questioning the structures that allowed someone like her to be overlooked until her voice was impossible to ignore. One evening, away from the cameras and the chaos, the billionaire met with the girl in private. The setting was simple: a quiet room with no audience, no reporters. For the first time, they spoke not as savior and survivor, but as two people whose lives had become intertwined by fate. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his tone sincere. "You didn't just save my life, you opened my eyes to things I'd been blind to for so long." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You don't have to thank me. Just don't forget what you saw. And don't forget that there are more people like me out there who just need someone to listen." He nodded, his eyes softening. "I won't. And I promise I'll do more than just listen. I'll make sure others like you have a chance not just to survive, but to thrive." It was a moment of mutual understanding, a connection that transcended their vastly different worlds. As the story began to settle in the public consciousness, its impact continued to ripple. The girl's transformation from invisible to indispensable wasn't just a story of personal redemption. It was a reflection of the untapped potential that exists within every overlooked individual. Stay with us as we bring you more stories that challenge perceptions and reveal the untold truths of power, privilege, and survival. The girl's story isn't just hers, it's a call to action for us all. This story has taken us on a journey of courage, survival, and the power of one voice to make a difference. From a bustling cafe in Manhattan to the unraveling of a massive criminal network, we've seen how one young woman's bravery changed everything. Her warning, shouted in desperation, saved a life and exposed a system of corruption that could no longer hide in the shadows. Her story forces us to ask tough questions. How many voices do we ignore every day? How often do we dismiss people based on appearances or circumstances, never realizing the wisdom or truth they might carry? And most importantly, what would you have done in her place? The billionaire's survival and the dismantling of a dangerous syndicate may feel like the climax, but the deeper story lies in what this moment reveals about our society: the power imbalances, the injustices, and the untapped potential of those we often overlook. Now it's your turn to share your thoughts. Would you have trusted her warning if you were in that cafe? What do you think we, as a society, can do to ensure voices like hers are heard? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. If this story moved you, make sure to like this video and share it with someone who loves stories that uncover hidden truths. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of our gripping Black true crime series. Next time, we'll take you on another journey, this time into a case where an unexpected hero emerges in the darkest hour. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.